This is Resonance 104.4 FM, flipping marvellous as always. I'm Nick Hennegan and welcome to a new season of Literary London, where we talk about things, well, kind of literary and Londony. And you don't get more literary Londony than my guest this week. It is Torin Douglas. Hello, Torin, welcome.
Hello, Nick. Lovely to be back.
It's great to have you back as well. And we are talking, of course, about... In fact, I'll just show you. Show you, I hear you say? Yes. If you're listening in FM, you'll know that we're also in Vision. We're actually on bohemianbritain.com in Vision. I'm recording this with Torin. Yes, it's in Vision. So if you want to check us out... And I'm actually showing you now the subject of today's chat, which is the Chiswick Book Festival. I mean, again, just looking, as you can see if you're listening in FM, the lineup of people that you've got already for this year include people like Jeremy Hunt, Jeremy Vine, Rita Chakrabarti, Jeffrey Holland, a local lad, comedian man. It's an incredible lineup. And I suppose it's fair to, modesty on your modesty aside, it's got a very good reputation, hasn't it, now, the Chiswick Book Festival, because you've been going a while.
Yeah, this is the 17th, and we actually started well. All those years ago, I thought, let's start slowly. But my colleagues who are Chiswick publishers and PR people, their idea of starting slowly was Antonia Fraser and Anthony Horowitz and people like that, Jacqueline Wilson, Michael Frayn. So that was the very first year. And I thought, how are we ever going to follow this? But then, of course, you realise there is no limit to the number of authors. So over the years, we've done very, very well. If you go on our website, you can see all of the authors who've taken part every year since then. And this year is a particularly spectacular year. We've got a great lineup. We've had more events sell out already this year than in the past, and they are selling out still. So that's not just a sales plug. If you go on the website, you will see.
And it's worth saying, of course, because this goes out, but people listen to this all forever. But your website will also be there forever. Just give the website a plug now, and we'll refer to it again later.
Yes, it's Chiswick, chiswickbookfestival.net. And if you just Google Chiswick Book Festival, it'll pop up. We're very active on social media as well. So on any of the socials, just put it in, you'll find us.
So chiswickbookfestival.net. Cool. And we must talk about you as well, because in a sense, you did completely start this. What gave you the idea initially for a Chiswick Book Festival?
Well, lots of other book festivals were around. We already had a festival called the Bedford Park Festival, which is not a community festival in the first garden suburb, Bedford Park, which actually is celebrating its 150th anniversary this year. So we've been bigging up that all year. But we always used to have a book event in that. And we've got the church. In the year 2000, there was a Millennium Project, and we redeveloped the church hall, the old Victorian church hall, gave it 2 stories so that you got an upstairs and a downstairs. And suddenly we got 3 venues that we could do something with. And we were thinking, what should we do with it? And I suggested to Father Kevin Morris, who's our vicar and very arts-minded, why don't we have a book festival? And we thought, it can't be that hard. All the publishers and all the authors will want us to do it. And we've got all our volunteers. We've got the venues. What's not to like? It's actually slightly more complicated than that, as we found over the years. But it has gone from strength to strength, and we're very pleased.
And we have talked in the past about Bedford Park, as you say. It was the first kind of garden suburb in certainly in London, which attracted, people like W.B. Yeats. We've spoken quite a lot about Yeats on this show as well. He was there in Chiswick for quite a while, wasn't he, as a lad?
Absolutely. He grew up here. He was here in 2 spells, but as a boy, he went to school. His father, they were looking for somewhere cheap. Let's face it, that's why in those days, Bedford Park and Chiswick were cheap places to live. Not so now, but Yeats grew up here. He did his first plays and poems here. Some of his most famous poems were written here. And a few years ago, we erected a sculpture in his name outside St. Michael and All Angels Church, which runs the festival, as you say.
And of course, for those that aren't local, Chiswick is in West London. And in fact, if you want to know how to get there, jump on the District line. Turnham Green.
When it's open.
And when it works, yes, that's right. When it's not on strike, which of course it won't be when this goes out, of course. Turnham Green and sort of come out and turn around. Although actually, I quite like the fact all your events are sort of very walkable, aren't they? I mean, Chiswick's not a huge place, although it's fairly large, but you've kept it all fairly central. And
we've always tried, in the very early days, we tried to keep it just to the Bath Road, and in the Bath Road, we've not only got the church and its two halls, but we've got the Tabard Theatre, which you know well, and the Tabard pub below the theatre. And then just up the road, there's the Arts Ed Performing Arts College that Andrew Lloyd Webber is the president of. And his foundation gave a good deal of money to develop their main theatre, and it's a wonderful 200-seater theatre. So we use that. So we'll be filling that tonight and tomorrow for various speakers. We've got other speakers, as you say, at the theatre at the Tabard. Since we started, the Chiswick Cinema has started, so we hold events there. Our first event this week was in the George IV pub, the Boston Room, where they hold lots of comedy and jazz events, and that went really well. So we try and bring in all the local venues, and then Chiswick Library, who's always been a big supporter, and that's where we hold quite a lot of our children's events, along with the Chiswick Catholic Centre, which is over the road from it.
Yeah, and it really is a kind of community. It has that lovely, I mean, because I live nearby, as you know, and we've spoken before. It does have that lovely community feel to it, actually, which is, you've got the kind of the stars and the celebs on one hand, and then the local people, oinks like myself, on the other hand.
And we've always tried to promote local writers. So as you say, we're able to get the big names, and that's fantastic to have those. And some of those live in Chiswick. So we do have some famous people living in Chiswick, but we've got an awful lot of local authors. And one of the things I wanted to do when we set up the festival all those years ago was to promote Chiswick's place. I thought Chiswick hadn't been recognised for the number of writers and great writers that it's had. Everybody from Thackeray and Pinter and John Osborne and all sorts of people over the years. So we set up a Chiswick timeline of writers and books, and I had no idea how many we'd get. But basically, to be on it, you have to have written a book and lived at some point in Chiswick W4, and we've got over 500 now, and we have the birth dates for over 390 of them, which means if you go on the timeline itself, the year-by-year timeline, you can go from John Donne at the top right down to an 8-year-old who's written her first book, with an awful lot of other names you'll have heard of in between, including you, Nick.
Having written a couple of books and a few plays. So I've got to ask as well, so what are your highlights? I mean, it must be asking for your favourite child, but what are your highlights? Bearing in mind this will go out live sort of halfway through the festival. But as we've already mentioned, if you go to chiswickbookfestival.net, you can keep in touch with all the events and, of course, presumably look at what's going to happen next year, but that is for later. So have you got any personal highlights?
Yeah, I mean, the one I really was hoping for in a big way was the one we actually held last night at Chiswick House, and that was Jane Austen, Fact and Fiction, celebrating the 250th anniversary of her birth. And of course, it's being celebrated all over the place, all over the country. Everybody is really paying homage to Jane Austen. But we signed up Jill Hornby, the writer of the Miss Austen novel, which then became a TV series earlier this year on the BBC. So we signed her up, but we wanted a bit more than just the author. And so we also invited two Chiswick actors who you know, Phyllis Logan and Kevin McNally, who are husband and wife, and played Mr. and Mrs. Austen, i.e. Jane Austen's parents. So we got them to do some readings. We also got the director of Miss Austen, Aisling Walsh, who also lives in Chiswick. So we got the three of them, and I thought it would be nice to put all these together. And what we didn't know when we signed up Jill Hornby was that she was about to become the president of the Jane Austen Society. Now, that's a very grand body who don't like liberties being taken with the wonderful Jane, but the fact that she was made the president, she's absolutely delighted about it and crowing about it. But anyway, that was last night. She was fantastic. She's so enthusiastic about Jane Austen, but also about Cassandra, who was the one who'd been demonized for burning all the letters, the sister who wanted to protect her sister's reputation. And Miss Austen, if anybody hasn't seen it, is all about the letters and how Cassandra tries to find them, and how another sister is or another relation is trying to get hold of them. It becomes a bit of a real drama, and it is beautifully acted. Keely Hawes played Cassandra, and as I say, Phyllis and Kevin. But it worked incredibly well, and the four of them bounced off each other well. I invited Phyllis and Kevin to read the first chapter of Pride and Prejudice, which is all Mr. and Mrs. Bennet. And I asked Jill, well, how far had she based her Mr. and Mrs. Austen in the book on the Mr. and Mrs. Bennet in Pride and Prejudice? And she said, well, yes, obviously there were crossovers, links there. And so that was a lovely moment. But we had clips from the show. It was absolutely packed, and everybody absolutely loved it. So that has to be my highlight so far, but we've got an awful long way to go.
And that was at Chiswick House, was it, you say?
That's right. Every year we've held an event at Chiswick House. We've celebrated Queen Victoria, who used to come to Chiswick House when ITV had their big TV series. We did Vanity Fair because Thackeray lived on Chiswick Mall. He called the opening chapter of Vanity Fair Chiswick Mall. So we had to celebrate that. So that was at Chiswick House a few years ago. And we always try and find something that is in keeping with this wonderful mini stately home that is such a wonderful place for everybody in Chiswick to come and visit.
Yeah, that was the point. So, I mean, it's an absolute tourist attraction in its own right, isn't it? Chiswick House, quite a glorious, as you say, mini mansion. That's quite good. Excuse me. And of course, you've got a fair bit of comedy as well. Arthur Smith, I notice, the mayor of Balham. Arthur Smith is going to be hosting an event.
That's right, with Rupert Gavin, Sir Rupert Gavin, I should say, who's a very distinguished theatre impresario and all sorts of other things. He was a very high up BBC Mandarin at one time. But he's written a book about the language and why English became the language of the world, what made it so, and all of the idiosyncrasies of it. So that'll be a fascinating one. As you say, he chose Arthur to do the interview with him.
He once asked me to marry him, Arthur Smith, but that's another story. It was, by the way, before he stopped drinking. So
did you accept?
I sort of did, yeah, but then he had to jump in a taxi and go. It was in Birmingham. It was a long. That's a story for another time. But a lovely chap. I actually produced a couple of his shows, an evening with Gary Lineker, and a thing called Trench Kiss, which he wrote, and we did that in a pub in Birmingham a few years ago. And he was very supportive then, so he's always a bit of a mate. I mean, of course, on Sunday we're talking about pubs. Of course, I've got to mention that.
Absolutely.
Yes, because I'm very honoured to have been asked to host Sam Cullen, a writer called Sam Cullen, who's written a book called London's Lost Pubs.
So when I was looking at that and thinking, who could we get to interview Sam Cullen, there was only one person we could choose. And I'm so delighted that you weren't doing something else that day.
Yes, so am I, actually. I'm really looking forward to it. I had a meet with Sam as well. And the book's quite fascinating. And of course, I do the London Literary Pub Crawl as well, which you credit in here. And it struck me, the more connected we get, my phone having just gone off then, the more connected we get, the more important things like pubs, I mean, not just pubs, but pubs are as centres for community to come and talk. And the fact that we're losing lots of them is interesting. And of course, London, anywhere in the world, I mean, I know we have a lot of people. Kath from California. Hello, Catherine, California. She always listens by the ocean, she tells us. But Catherine, California, I mean, we'll know the areas of London that we're going to be talking about. And I love the idea as well that the Dream Factory is. You've also got workshops for writers, which is a good idea.
That's right. We've always encouraged writing as well. There's now a Chiswick writing group, which has its own Instagram account. So if anybody's looking to encourage their own writing, they're now meeting at the Chiswick Cinema. So do go along to that. But as you say, some great workshops on different aspects of writing. The 4 great things you need to write a good novel. There's a workshop on how to use social media to actually then promote your book and so on. And so have a look at the programme. I think that's the easiest thing to do, and browse it. There are still tickets for an awful lot of events.
Yes, and there are an awful lot of events. Do you know the number offhand?
It's about 80, I think, which is too many because we get lots of clashes. And everybody says, "Oh, I wanted to go to that one, and this one's on." We inserted Jonathan Friedland to at a late stage his book, The Traitor's Circle. He's been everywhere on the media this week, but we didn't get him because it wasn't available when we were first starting the program. Then somebody dropped out, so we put him in. And various people said, "Oh, but I'm already going to see Alan Johnson talking about Harold Wilson that time, and I can't do both." And I'm afraid that's one of the things about book festivals. Sometimes it's an embarrassment of riches.
Yes, it certainly is. I mean, I have had that problem myself. I've been looking at it, go, oh, I wish I could do that one. But I'm Nick Hennegan. This is Literary London on Resonance 104.4 FM. Also, of course, in Vision on bohemianbritain.com. Come on, frighten yourself, children. You can see me in glorious Technicolor. We're talking with Torrin Douglas, who is the director. Have I got that right? Director of the Chiswick Book Festival. I love a quote that you came out with a little while ago about Chiswick being the most kind of writerly place in London. That was a lovely quote. It's kind of true from what you've already mentioned.
Absolutely. We have this writing. So I mentioned the timeline of writers. And at the time, we only had about 250 on it at the time that The Observer had this wonderful article saying Chiswick may be Britain's most literary location, which if we'd written that ourselves, nobody would have believed it. But because it's in The Observer, we can quote it all over the place, and we do. And it's one of the other great highlights was the Wall Street Journal, a couple of years ago, wrote a travel piece saying, visiting London, don't skip Chiswick, a lush paradise that inspired W.B. Yeats, Van Gogh, and more. And again, I couldn't have written that better myself.
Yes, it is quite remarkable once you kind of dig into it a little bit. Turnham Green Church, which was painted by Van Gogh, wasn't it? And as you say, I think it's Chiswick goes back to Chiswick, wasn't it originally?
That's right, indeed. And one of the reasons we have so many writers is there are different bits. It goes back a long way. So in the 1500s, John Donne was the prebend of Chiswick, so that's why he's up there. But we've had Hogarth, obviously. We've had Thackeray, as I say. We've had Pope. All of those people, because in those days Chiswick was a little village by the River Thames. And then, of course, as it grew, and as places like Bedford Park grew, that created a whole new area of Chiswick that inspired creativity. Bedford Park was set up as an artists and cultural community designed to attract people of a creative bent. And that's, again, why we got so many.
And I must ask you personally how you got involved in this, because you're a journalist, excuse me. I always remember you on LBC, going back a few years. And you were also involved with royalty as well, weren't you?
With royalty?
Yes. Didn't you do some PR for
Well, I didn't do PR. The reason I got involved, I've been writing about the media for many, many years. And as you say, my first broadcast job was a program on LBC called Advertising World, which was aimed at the advertising business and all the media and all the creatives and so on. And that was great fun. And we put it on at drive time on a Wednesday. So when people were driving home, they would listen to it. And people still remember that program fondly, which is lovely. But then I joined the Times. I was on The Economist and places. But then I joined the BBC as its media correspondent. And the reason I got involved with royalty was because in those days, there were all the royal scandals and all the tabloids stories about the royal family. And at the time, the BBC didn't really want to dignify these stories by putting their own court and royal correspondents on them, because once the BBC did that, it would give them added credibility. So if you could give them to the media correspondent who could do them as a, quote, sort of nasty tabloid story, by the way, this is what it says, they could get those stories out there. And then, of course, we had phone hacking and we had all of those other things. Then we had, very sadly, Diana's death. And on the day she died, I was one of the people who was called in the middle of the night, because she'd been chased by paparazzi all week, and the paparazzi element of that story and whether they were to blame for her death and so on was something that the media correspondent would rightly cover. So I was then covering the whole of the week after her death, and you'll remember what a manic, strange week that was, right up until the funeral. And then everybody else who'd been covering it up to that point they knocked off at the end of the funeral, but Earl Spencer, in his address, you'll remember, laid a great attack on the press and blamed the press for his sister's death. So suddenly that was a whole new line, and I was suddenly, having been number 2 on the bulletins all that week, I was suddenly number 1 for the next week. So it was a huge story in those days, and even now, I mean, we remember it and we think about it and so on.
Yes, it's funny. Funny enough, there's a poster you'll see if you're listening in FM, A Ghost of a Chance, the story that I was writing, and I was actually editing that night, and I heard a report come through that Princess Diana apparently had broken her arm in a car crash. And I actually wrote, we were doing a stream of consciousness around that, and I actually wrote, cool, what a lot of rubbish these people come up with. And then, of course, the next day we found out the awful truth. So it is kind of still with us. And what was it, if you don't mind me asking, what was it that got you into the writing initially? Were your parents in writing, or they creatives, or what
it's
kicked you
one
off?
of the. I wanted to be a journalist from about the age of 8, and I think what attracted me, there was a board game called Scoop. That had a mock telephone, and you made up you had the stories were already there written for you, and then you had to throw a dice and get the stories and then put them on the front page. And there was a mock telephone that you rang and so on. And there were even ads on the front page and so on. And that, whether it was that struck me or anything else, but from the age of 8, I was writing newspapers at school. My father lent me the office typewriter so that I could type out newspapers and so on. At public school, I edited the newspaper. At the university, I edited the newspaper. And my father encouraged me all the way until he realized I hadn't grown out of it. And at the time, I was looking for jobs after university in the milk ground. And he encouraged me to go on the milk ground of all these, what I thought were very boring companies like De La Rue, the banknote makers, and Tube Investments, who make tubes. And anyway, I didn't get on any of those. And I also applied for the graduate training schemes of Thomson Newspapers and the BBC and so on. And I didn't get on any of those either, but I still started, I kept on applying for newspaper jobs. And my first newspaper job was on a publication that nobody's really heard of unless they actually used to buy it, called The Weekly News. And it was a sort of D2E social group publication. But it was published, interestingly, by the publishers of the Beano and Dandy, D.C. Thompson, a very strange Scottish company. And that was my first job. And I was looking for jobs after that. I then got a job on Campaign magazine, which was the media and advertising paper, and that's how I got to learn about the media. In those days, nobody was really interested in the media except me and a few other people. But then Saatchi and Saatchi came on the scene, the fabled advertising agency, and they started working for Margaret Thatcher and British Airways. And suddenly it was sexy to talk about the media. And I was very lucky that Harold Evans, the legendary editor of The Times, decided this was an area that The Times now needed to cover. And somebody recommended me to him. And so I started writing a weekly column for them. So that's how I got into it.
And so does your father now think you've got a proper job?
Indeed so. I mean, the funny thing about the proper job was he did, and he and my mum were very proud when I started doing those sorts of things. But on my first, I then joined the BBC as the media correspondent, having been at LBC. And on my first day at the BBC, I was taken around the programmes I was going to be broadcasting for, hopefully. And I went into the Today office, and Brian Redhead, the legendary presenter, who didn't suffer fools at all, let alone gladly. And I was introduced to him as the new media correspondent, and he said, "Oh, well, I hope you get a proper job one day. So, if ever I were to write my autobiography, which I certainly shan't, it would be called a proper job.
Yes, I had a little bit of that, although yes, it wasn't quite at that level. Wheeler's Lane Secondary Modern Boys School didn't have much of a, he left at 15. But yeah, I remember my mum going, "Oh, get on the BBC," and I did. Oh, that's nice enough. Anyway, we're talking about the Chiswick Book Festival, and of course we've got to mention as well because we're running out of time. I could talk to you forever. Jo, who of course has been programming the festival. It's her last one.
Jo James is the most
Yeah.
wonderful program director, and she, as you say, this is her 10th. And we announced a couple of days ago in the book trade press and in the Chiswick press that this was her last one. She's stepping down, but she has done a fantastic job for us. She has, I mean, she's been in the book trade for years. She was an events manager for Ottakers that was then bought by Waterston. So she really knew the book trade well. And then she started working for the Cheltenham Literary Festival, both programming and also running their writers' room. And she runs lots of others. And she has brought us writers that we could not have got otherwise, but she's also very, very well organized. Sir Michael Palin has said of her that she's unflappable, she's very good with people, but doesn't suffer fools. And I think that is true. And as we speak, she's on her laptop sorting out the last minute changes to the program or making sure that people have got their parking places. It is a huge job running a book festival, and at this moment it becomes very, very intense because so many people have suddenly woken up to the fact, like you, that they're speaking tomorrow, or and that nobody's coming, or is anybody coming, or has it sold out, and all of those questions. And we've got a really good team of volunteers who help with all of that. But it's Jo who puts the program together, and then of course we've got quite a lot of tech involved. So we've got video and slides and so on, and all that has to be put together. So at this moment, St Michael and All Angels Church is suddenly being transformed into a festival centre. Waterston's have just arrived with all the books, and we couldn't do it without them, because if we couldn't sell the authors' books, we wouldn't get the authors, and they do a fantastic job for us. But it's a hive of activity.
Oh, it's brilliant. I'm very much looking forward to it. And I say already, there's things I always miss the Chiswick party, the writers' party that Jo James actually always hosts. And that's what we've got time for. But thank you so much, Torrin Douglas, who is the director of the Chiswick Book Festival. I hope you're watching this now. There you go. There's a picture of the cover. If you'd like to know any more, then www.chiswickbookfestival.net is the address. Chiswickbookfestival.net. Thank you so much for your time, Torrin.
You're welcome, Nick. And there are still tickets for your event on Sunday, so please do come. It will be great.
Yes, that's the Tabard Theatre. We're looking at London's Lost Pubs. I will have a drink or two afterwards, I'm sure. But anyway, so thank you again, Torrin, for your time, and thanks for the Chiswick Book Festival as well. But it's a brilliant event in West London if you're around. But that's all from me. It's nice to be back. I shall see you next week. I'm Nick Hennegan. This is Literary London. We're on BohemianBritain.com, but chiefly and mainly on Resonance 104.4 FM.